Hi everyone, I'm John Rennie and thanks for joining me here in the Boneyard. Brian De Palma's Sisters, released by the famously low-budget horror producers American International Pictures in 1973, is what gritty horror is all about. It's got talent, gore, cool characters, a cast to die for, and it's inspired by a master of the genre. Horror is in the eye of the beholder, and this $500,000 thriller was a turning point for its young director Brian De Palma, who took his interest in voyeurism and pitch-black sense of humor and put it all to work in a psychosexual murder mystery. This tiny little horror movie would mark his shift from a countercultural indie filmmaker to a suspense-driven stylist and pave the way for his later heralded work such as Dressed to Kill, Blowout, and of course Carrie. So please join me this episode as we take a deep dive and journey into the insane world of Hollywood legend Brian De Palma and open the twisted family album of Sisters. In 1972, Brian De Palma had just had trouble with his first attempt at a Hollywood movie, and he'd had the big-budget comedy Get to Know Your Rabbit taken away from him and recut by the studio because of creative differences. But De Palma said it wasn't a total disaster, as he got to work with a personal hero on that movie, the great Orson Welles.
Some of your friends on board?
Former pupil of mine.
Can I open it now?
Kid, I don't care what you do.
So coming off that false start to a bigger career, De Palma did what many low-budget producers and budding directors do. He turned to the horror genre, a wave of cinema that producers love because low-budget horror can hit huge. So, when De Palma asked producer Edward Pressman to come on board, he was probably pretty sure he could make a buck or two from a relatively small investment from a director who had already had two marginally successful independent counterculture hits with Greetings and Hi Mom, both of which starred some young guy named Robert De Niro.
I'd like to say hello to my mother, if you don't mind. Of course. Thank you. Hi, Ma.
Sisters was a smart, calculated move for De Palma, as he needed to make a hit to start the next phase of his career, and his crew of cast and friends and trusted colleagues all pitched in to make this low-budget horror movie work. De Palma had actually been living with the two stars of the movie at the time, and had been dating actress Margot Kidder, so casting for the movie started pretty close to home.
I had gone to California, sort of in hopeless despair because everything I was doing in New York wasn't working, and ran into Jennifer and stayed at her house, and that's where I met Margot. And that's where I got the idea of using them and writing the script with them in mind.
Knowing that he would have limited resources and only a few sets because of the budget, De Palma kept it simple and achievable. The plot of the movie is a fusion of psychological horror, and as most critics of De Palma tirelessly remind us, it has many elements of a Hitchcockian style thriller. Sisters would serve as a foundation for De Palma's rise to prominence in Hollywood. Now, this is the first time I've seen this film in many years, and it is still a haunting movie like I remembered, and there was one scene in particular that gave me chills.
No. It's a clean telephone. Just think you can walk in here like that?
What a creepy scene, and great but brief performance of insanity from actress Katherine Gaffigan.
It's a good way to get sick. That's how I got so sick! Someone called me on the telephone!
That one scene really freaked me out, but that being said, it's also darkly comic, and one of the things I didn't recall is just how darkly comic this movie is.
You'd like that, wouldn't you? That'd make a great story for your next issue. Police refuse to investigate brutal race murder.
It seems to me like the whole movie plays out as a B-movie horror pastiche, right down to legendary composer Bernard Herrmann's bombastic horror score for the movie, complete with high theremin-like synths and creeping sounds, which often seem out of place in a modern horror movie, as its stabbing strings and eerie, high-pitched notes recall back to his classic thrillers and work with Alfred Hitchcock from scores in the 1950s. It seemed to me that in Sisters, all we needed were a few more flashes of lightning and a rainstorm, and this movie would have been closer to a Todd Browning or even a James Whale movie than a Hitchcock thriller. And I really enjoyed that about this movie this time around. It's no secret that De Palma is a student of Hitchcock, but so is every other filmmaker. He is also so much more than that, and his love of horror has been a staple of his works, from his earliest short films, such as Wouton's Wake, made in 1963, which he made with his friend William Finley, who later starred in Sisters 10 years later. Just from those few short clips from that movie, you can see that he was playing with classic horror tropes from the very beginning, like a man chasing someone in a top hat and a black cape, which is closer in style to something like House of Wax, or even Phantom of the Opera, than anything Hitchcock ever made. And I think that there is a lot more of this classic horror style in Sisters than there is in De Palma's use of Hitchcock's story devices. It mirrors Hitchcock's stories, yes, but in style, it is much closer to classic low-budget horror B-movies. I think De Palma knew that he was making a low-budget shocker and drew on these black and white classics in order to make Sisters.
They brought their picnic lunches.
Right down to the head of the asylum in the film's climax being involved in the terror, just as was the good doctor himself in the incredibly influential classic horror Dr. Caligari. De Palma wasn't just using Hitchcock. He was calling on all the masters of cinema when he finally made his mark with Sisters. For example, if we look at the end scene in Dressed to Kill, we have a storm and lightning flashing, all the tropes of classic horror. That create a sense of atmosphere in a scene that has a lot more psycho-sexually charged energy bubbling under the surface than anything Hitchcock ever made. De Palma may begin with an idea similar to something like Psycho, but in Dressed to Kill, he adds his own deep, dark vision to it, his pitch-black sense of humor, and creates something that is, I think, wholly original. Once again, in the final set piece of another De Palma classic, on split personalities, Raising Cain, we have the action and horror take place in a lightning storm. This is much more theatrical than anything Hitchcock would ever do. And once again, De Palma applies himself to these classic horror tropes and set pieces and creates something wholly original.
That body is here somewhere, and she knows it.
How many rooms do you have, Miss Bertani?
That being said, there is of course no doubt Sisters' story is inspired by Alfred Hitchcock's psychological thrillers, particularly the dual personalities of Psycho, the repressed memories of Marnie, and the adjacent apartment dweller that witnesses a murder, as in Rear Window.
Turn out the light, he's seen us.
But De Palma crafted Sisters as more of an exercise in cinematic horror and tension, and all he did was borrow elements of story from the master of suspense, but again, who hasn't in Hollywood? If Charlie Brewster didn't look out of his window into the neighbor's house, we wouldn't have Fright Night. In my opinion, De Palma takes these common traits and voyeuristic themes, his split-screen compositions, and Bernard Herrmann's creeping score, and crafts a low-budget horror that is much more than the sum of its influences, and much more than a simple homage to Hitchcock. Sisters was the beginning of De Palma's own unique style, a blend of operatic violence, black humor, and interwoven narrative structures that couldn't be more different than Hitchcockian style. De Palma is loose with the camera and creates a dream sequence that is closer to something from the French New Wave than the plain, perfectly composed stillness of Psycho. For example, in a scene where a doctor explains the plot and exposition to other characters, both filmmakers have a doctor explain these things, but Hitchcock does it in a very controlled and even a little bland situation, whereas De Palma does it in a dream, in the style of cinema verite. Very different filmmakers indeed.
They believe that Dominique is the one who truly stirs.
Norman Bates no longer exists. He only half existed to begin with. And now, the other half has taken over.
Anyway, I don't want to spend too much time on these Hitchcock comparisons, as I think it's pretty clear that by the time De Palma gets to something like Scarface, he is totally his own man and has become his own unique personality in cinema.
Well, because Hitchcock, I think, pioneered a whole type of film grammar. He taught us how to express things as clearly visually, I think, as they can be expressed as like good grammar. I mean, learning how to try to use that grammar, I very much tried to look through his eye, and I think now have sort of evolved a kind of grammar of my own. But I mean, if you want to know anything about cinematic storytelling, I mean, he's it.
What De Palma did with AIP and producer Edward Pressman, who would also go on to become a producing legend in Hollywood, working with the likes of Oliver Stone, is exactly what someone like A24 or Neon, who produce derivative horror movies, are doing today. They take something old, like the old dark house trope, rebrand it as modern or elevated horror, and sell it as something new. This is the way the business has always worked. Producers utilize up-and-coming talent, add stylized cinematography, accomplished actors, and derivative horror tropes in order to make a buck. The big difference with Sisters is that it has Brian De Palma's original talent behind it.
I did the best I could with what I had, which gives, you many ideas how to make stuff work, which is essentially inexpensive and very effective.
Call it a copycat or not, these filmmakers knew exactly what they were trying to make and sell, and they nailed it.
These are films being made not for $600,000, but being made for $1 million to $2 million, which look like real movies, and it can be done. It's really an attitude, and it's often easier to do it that way with a first-time filmmaker or a director who's so passionate that he's willing to go through the ordeal of making a film without the resources and the comfort that a good budget brings, but the quality of the film can actually be benefited.
Sisters, I got the idea from a picture in Life magazine. They had these Russian Siamese twin sisters called Masha and Dasha. As they're sitting together on a couch, one looking kind of gay and happy, and the other one sort of slumped over to the side looking completely psychopathic. And the caption was, although they're physiologically perfectly normal, as they develop into adolescence, they're developing certain mental problems.
Late the next day, the Institute announced a successful separation. Dominique and Danielle, once one, would now stand each alone.
Yeah. What do you think? That's an extraordinary tape, Mr. McLennan.
The story of Sisters was written by Brian De Palma and Louisa Rose, and it centers on a French-Canadian model, Danielle Breton,
Don't bite, you know.
who has a twisted connection with her troubled twin sister, Dominique. After a brutal murder takes place in her apartment, investigative journalist Grace Collier becomes obsessed with uncovering the truth, leading her into a nightmarish conspiracy involving medical experiments, psychological trauma, and one of De Palma's most unnerving dream sequences. The star of Sisters, Margot Kidder, who was still a few years away from her career-defining role as Lois Lane in Superman, directed by Richard Donner in 1978, delivers a mesmerizing performance as both Danielle and Dominique. Her ability to shift between vulnerable victim and unhinged killer showcases the psychological depth that De Palma wanted to explore.
Where can you make her go away?
And I think it's hugely because of her role in the movie that it works so well.
Many times at night I watch the television show and I watch the horror film and it makes me full of fear.
And I have to say, all these years later, the murder scene still scared me a little. Watching late at night in the dark, her twisted face as Herman's score strikes and the way she looked so demented after the shock to it all is pretty insane and intense stuff. Kidder was an actress unafraid to tackle anything from Lois Lane to the Amityville Horror.
You all gone mad?
To the epic horror movie Black Christmas, and in later years an appearance in Rob Zombie's Halloween 2.
The theory is that this ambiguous stimuli here will bring your subconscious thoughts into the light and illuminate them. So what do you see?
Kidder was someone special. I've loved her work my whole life, especially her horror movies, and I was really sad to see her go in 2018.
Thanks. Don't mention it.
She was a fearless, one-of-a-kind actress, and without her, Sisters just wouldn't be the same.
Okay.
I'll be right back.
I wait for you.
Aside from Kidder, the movie was also cast perfectly in supporting roles, and has a brief performance from one of the all-time greats, Charles Durning, who steals a few of the scenes as an amateur investigator and adds some wonderful moments of humor.
Serious.
Grace, this is a craft. I wouldn't try to teach you how to write magazine articles. Listen, I went to school to learn this, the Brooklyn Institute of Modern Investigation. Okay? Okay.
The rear window moment when he is over in the killer's apartment is great, and this guy always makes me laugh.
Meet me in the truck.
He's a fantastic actor, and these moments really help to drive that dark humor that seems to permeate every frame of this movie for me.
The body.
What about the body?
What I went up there to look for, remember? The body is in the couch!
Terrific!
Brian, how was that? He said, do it again. Then I said, what do you want? Tell me what you want. And he said, just do it again. And he told me to do it again on like the fourth or fifth take. And I said, you don't know what you want, do you? But if you see it, you'll tell me what's... So after about 150 takes, he finally said yes. Oh, cast was just great, I thought. And I never forgave him for leaving me up on the telephone pole.
One of the defining aspects of Sisters was its innovative use of split-screen techniques, which De Palma had been employing since he filmed a live show for his movie Dionysus 69. In Sisters, he uses this technique to heighten suspense, allowing the audience to see two perspectives simultaneously and have the thrills play out in real time. The famous sequence where Grace tries to alert the police to the murder after she witnesses it, and while Danielle's apartment is being hastily cleaned up by the doctor, is a masterclass in visual tension. Film editor Paul Hirsch, who was one of the crew members of Sisters that went on to immense success, editing such classics as Star Wars a few years later in 1977, had this to say about editing with Brian De Palma's split-screen techniques.
I find split screen interesting, but I also find that it acts as a distancing device, so that in a sense it takes you out of the movie. So rather than identifying with the characters on the screen, you're watching them from a distance. This is in line with Brian's objective and distance from people. I experience films in a more visceral way and not so much intellectually as Brian does.
You know, we have the famous Godard quote that, you know, film is truth 24 times a second. Well, quite to the contrary, I think it lies 24 times a second. And you can manipulate images to say anything you want, which is why television is such a great propaganda tool. And I'm always interested in showing, it's a kind of a Brechtian approach where you make the audience aware of the form that they're watching and how the form, the medium is the message, the Marshall McLuhan idea. The form, in fact, is so much a part of what is being expressed at the same time.
It's Peeping Toms, starring Ted Pratt. And now...
Watching Sisters more than 50 years after its initial release, it's these techniques that still make the film worth watching. If you are a regular here on the Boneyard, you'll know by now that I am a lover of independent cinema, and especially the low-budget horror end of things, because I believe it's when filmmakers are at their most innovative, because they have to use all of their tricks and talent to make a low-budget independent movie work on a crazy tight schedule and budget, but also make it stand out amongst the hundreds of independent horror movies that get made every year. And that is what De Palma's talent brought to this movie. He made it unique.
It's that score, and those creepy twins and all those freaks running around. It's extremely creepy. See, the interesting thing about making movies is once you do them, you don't think about them anymore, that's the great thing about being an artist, is you can get those strange images in your head out.
It may have story elements from other movies and bring with it Bernard Herrmann's masterful touch on the soundtrack, but ultimately, if you turned off the soundtrack to Sisters, it would still work as a surreal, independent, almost verite movie, because De Palma is a unique director. And the way he directs movies is like no one else in the business. De Palma thrills us with his dramatic and operatic violence, and makes us respect his work because of his understanding and admiration for cinema and the filmmakers that came before him. But most of all, he entertains us. To watch De Palma's movies, you don't have to be a movie brat, academic or film scholar. You can simply sit back and enjoy the heck out of his movies, because the man knew how to thrill an audience and dazzle us with his unique, darkly comic, highly sexualized and stylized cinema. What more could a film fan ask for? Thanks for watching my take on Brian De Palma's Sisters. If you would like to hear more from me on Brian De Palma and other filmmakers, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. You can choose to support me here by becoming a member for exclusive content, including my own short films and making of commentaries. And don't forget to check out the store tab for new merch and clothing designs. You can also join the team over on Patreon. We also have a new members only perk where you get the option to choose movies for me to review here on the channel. Please don't forget to let me know your thoughts on this classic horror in the comments below, because it's your contribution that keeps me digging up classics right here in the Boneyard. Take care everyone, and as always, thank you all so much for listening.